Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Dick Morningstar, the chairman of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. And I'm glad to welcome this huge audience that we have for today's program. Today we'll be exploring key actions that must be taken to reach net zero by 2050. And it's a pleasure to host such a stellar lineup that we have today, and also to be in partnership with our colleagues at Net Power. And when we get, by the way, to the Q&A portion of the program, please be sure to submit your questions through the Q&A function in Zoom. And remember that this program is on the record. We are going to start today with a very special message from His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, who's been championing for 4 decades environmental sustainability. A year ago, he launched the Sustainable Markets Initiative at Davos, aiming to accelerate the transition to a sustainable future, and at the same time amplifying the critical role of the private sector, which is part of what he'll be talking about and we'll be talking about today. In the year ahead, he's working to mobilize and further accelerate these efforts by showcasing solutions and the opportunity to scale. We're honored to hear His Royal Highness's thoughts on how this initiative can contribute to finding sustainable solutions and the energy transition. So we will now hear from His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am most grateful to Bill Brown, founder and CEO of Net Power, for inviting me to join you today. I must say, having recognized over the years the increasingly urgent need to buy precious time in the battle against catastrophic global warming and climate change through the scaling up of carbon capture technologies, I was most inspired to learn about Net Power's breakthrough technology, the that converts natural and renewable gas into zero emissions power using carbon dioxide, whilst at the same time lowering the price of energy. Such a remarkable and ingenious feat of engineering is exactly the news we need to hear at one of the most critical and difficult times in the world's history. This example of potentially game-changing innovation demonstrates the critical role the private sector has to play in driving the solutions to the climate and biodiversity crises. Now, after what must be almost 40 years working on these issues, I have to say that making progress has often felt like pushing an enormous boulder uphill. However, over the past 2 years, I have seen a dramatic shift in the engagement of the private sector and private finance in the whole field of sustainability. Coming, as it does, so dangerously late in the day, this has finally made it possible for me to establish my Sustainable Markets Initiative to try and accelerate the shift to a sustainable future, while putting nature, people, and planet at the heart of global value creation. Over the past year, I have been busy convening coalitions of the willing across industries and countries to identify the game changers and persistent barriers to progress. It is clear that no business and no industry can succeed on its own. After all, it is precisely when we come together and connect the dots, very often across disciplines, geographies, and industries, that we suddenly find innovative solutions and new ways forward. If I may, I would just like to highlight a few areas that would make a tremendous difference. First of all, the private sector has a vital role to play to ensure sustainability is central to business strategy, decision-making, investment, accounting, procurement, supply chains, and consumer engagement. Increasingly, businesses are expected to be responsible global citizens delivering returns not only for shareholders, but for society and for nature as well. Second, there is a need to reimagine, design, and communicate the future of industry and the future of the economy while identifying, scaling, and showcasing sustainable solutions and alternatives. This will require active investment in innovation, technology, research, and development, along with collaborative competition in a way that accelerates global progress. In these efforts, we can also make sustainable options the trusted and attainable options for consumers. After all, market-leading companies have demonstrated that it is entirely possible to be profitable and sustainable at the same time. In fact, businesses and investments that are ESG aligned are increasingly outperforming those that are not, even in the current economic crisis. Third, if we have the resolve to shift our trajectory, we must start now by bringing forward our net zero target. I'm afraid 2050 simply suggests we have room to delay. We must start taking the tough decisions now rather than deferring them to our successors. This includes working to ensure that incentives such as carbon pricing are aligned to achieve the desired result. I am therefore encouraging the private sector to outline their roadmaps so we can see the practical steps that are required. We know that major technological, industry and business model changes are needed over the next 10 years, but progress cannot be made in silos. Industries, like countries, are interconnected and interdependent. Progress in one industry can catalyze and incentivize progress in another. In this way, inter-industry efforts have never been more important, particularly as currently companies around the world are failing to produce credible climate transition action plans. Of the over 40,000 listed companies globally, only 2.5% have committed to set a science-based target, and only 0.5% have set a validated target in line with the Paris Agreement goal of 1.5 degrees centigrade. Fourth, financing of industry transition and scaling sustainable enterprise also require the mainstreaming of environmental, social, and governance, ESG, factors, along with industry standards and metrics. These are core to the decision-making processes of institutional investors and banks on the one hand, and company boards, management teams, and shareholders on the other. These factors have become much more material to value creation and returns in recent years. Integration of ESG standards and metrics into capital allocation and business decisions is ultimately what is required to mainstream industry transition around the world. Fifth, and finally, nature's contribution to the global economy is estimated to be worth more than $125 trillion annually, greater than the entire world's annual GDP. If we build conservation and nature-based solutions into our asset base and supply chains, we will be able to drive significant economic growth for countries and businesses alike, impacting the lives and livelihoods of millions of people. And in order to accelerate the restoration of biodiversity and nature's ecosystems in the alarmingly short time left to us, and we are now witnessing the massive destruction of our entire life support system on this planet, it will be essential to expedite globally trusted and verifiable carbon offsetting efforts, both nature-based and engineered, that reduce emissions while restoring natural capital. Ladies and gentlemen, following a devastating year dominated by the coronavirus pandemic, we have learned that human health and planetary health are fundamentally interconnected. We have also learned that science, necessity, and resources combined can be a powerful accelerator. My Sustainable Markets Initiative is committed to working hand in hand with the private sector to intensify the pace and practical impact of transition efforts. A sustainable future is, in fact, the growth story of our time, but it is up to us to seize it. With the clock ticking and time rapidly running out, we have to make each day count.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, for incredibly thoughtful comments and remarks, which do provide an outstanding, excellent context for today's discussion. It's now my pleasure to introduce the amazingly dynamic Bill Brown, our partner in today's program. Bill is the co-founder and CEO of Net Power and 8 Rivers Capital. I would describe Bill as sort of the Renaissance man of the environmental movement. He's a lawyer, a law school professor, a finance expert working with Goldman Sachs and other firms, and a scientist, having a graduate of MIT. And so I'm going to turn it over to Bill for his comments about where net power is going and where net zero is going over the next decade and beyond.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And thank you, Atlantic Council, for being our partners and for your leadership in helping us all get to a low-cost, sustainable future. You know, I'd also like to take this moment to thank the Net Power team, McDermott International and David Dixon. We've got Exelon Corporation and Chris Crane. We've got Occidental Petroleum and Vicki Hollab, who will be joining us later. And finally, 8 Rivers Capital and its team of engineers who created our extraordinary technology. These are all true rock stars in making Net Power what it is today. Finally, I'd like to thank His Royal Highness for his remarks this morning and for his words, putting nature, people, and planet at the heart of global value creation. At Net Power, we're honored to be part of his coalition of the willing in his Sustainable Markets Initiative. Now, today, we're getting together to focus on getting to net zero by 2050. That goal is as big as it is necessary. When you put it in cost terms, it sounds really big. According to Morgan Stanley, we need to spend $50 trillion to get to net zero. That's $50 trillion. To put it differently, every day for the next 30 years, we need to spend $3 to $6 billion to retrofit, replace, or offset carbon-emitting equipment. I'll say that once again. Every day for 30 years, $3 to $6 billion. That may sound impossible, but I sincerely believe it is very doable. We just need to follow 5 principles, and this requires understanding 5 elements. Let's name them. First, the equipment. Second, how that equipment will be used. Third, what we do with the waste. Fourth, the ecosystem for the equipment. 5, the initiating spark. Now let's build on that. If we use equipment that's readily available, we can start building. If we use one piece of equipment to produce multiple earning streams, we lower costs dramatically. If we keep the waste in the system, we don't hurt the environment, and we can actually create new earning streams. And if we make sure that every component of the bigger system is connected, we get a network effect. Finally, if we find the right spark, it all takes off. That all sounds pretty easy, but it is actually incredibly hard for most people to see. So let's take one step deeper and create our 5 principles. Our first principle, use existing equipment. There are a lot of people out there trying to invent the solution, and net power is one of those. But we learned that while invention is good, we won't make it to 2050 if we keep inventing. Let me show you why. Let's go to our website where we can take a virtual tour of our LaPorte test facility. When you take our tour, the first person you'll meet is Dwight. He's been our plant manager since construction started in April of 2016. All the equipment that you see behind Dwight is readily available off the shelf. Now, let's take a walk. Let's go see the one thing in the entire facility that we had to design and prove out. On the way, everything you see here is readily available. Now, we're getting in under the turbine. Let's look up. That is our combustor. It is attached to the turbine. A combustor is in every gas turbine. Our combustor is just like a combustor on a gas turbine with one exception. It doesn't use regular air. Instead, it uses a type of synthetic air. Regular air is 80% nitrogen and 20% oxygen. To make our synthetic air, we remove the nitrogen and we replace it with carbon dioxide. Why would we do that? Nitrogen doesn't burn and carbon dioxide doesn't burn. Why replace one with the other? Well, when you burn natural gas, it produces two things, carbon dioxide and water. One's a gas, the other's a liquid. And when you burn natural gas and air, that carbon dioxide is mixed with a bunch of nitrogen. Those two are hard to separate. We can do it, but it costs more than we want. On the other hand, when you burn natural gas in our synthetic air, the carbon dioxide is mixed up with more carbon dioxide. No separation problem. This seems elegant and simple. One problem, we use our synthetic air at high pressures, and no one knew whether our combustor would produce a stable flame. So we had to conduct an experiment. We had to build an entire plant to support that experiment. And that experiment happened inside this one little piece of equipment. In 2018, we were successful. And in 2018, we also showed that the whole cycle worked. Now, all that took us 8 years. 8 years to create something new and bring it to the point where we could start commercializing it. At this point, we have 4 big plants underway at different places around the world, and you'll hear more about those when we're ready to announce them. We filed interconnects, gotten land leases, put out RFQs to lots of vendors, we have term sheets signed. It took us 10 years to get to this point. We're proud of that, but we learned one big lesson. Don't invent something new again. We don't have time if we really want to get to net zero by 2050. We need to use standard Legos, red, yellow, green, blue. And in the world of Legos, we think of our combustor as our purple Lego. Now, that's the end of the tour, but I wanted you to see that purple Lego. It's a really valuable Lego. But remember, we all have to spend $3 to $6 billion every day for 30 years. And banks are not going to finance that amount of money unless we spend it on existing equipment with full guarantees. That brings us to our second point. We need to use the same piece of equipment to produce multiple earning streams. We need to rejigger the world the way it works. Today, we're living in a world that has a parallel to the world of 1990. Back then, you had Sears and IBM. Sears was the biggest and best mail order retailer, and IBM was the biggest computer company. But neither one of them realized that the two companies needed to be squished together to create a company called Amazon. Sears just thought it needed to be a better Sears, and IBM thought it just needed to be a better IBM. Neither one of them paid much attention to the other. So today, when we have a net power plant combined with a hydrogen plant of one of our shareholders, we face a big problem. Power companies don't want to operate a hydrogen plant, and hydrogen companies don't want to operate a power plant. Yet, by combining these two plants into one, we make both products at disruptive prices. We make electricity at prices that work in any power market, and we make clean hydrogen around 50 cents a kilo, clean ammonia well below $100 a ton. At these prices, hydrogen and ammonia become competitive with natural gas. As I mentioned at the beginning, we at Net Power believe that we need to keep one piece of machine producing several earning streams. So at our very core, we believe that the future of the world requires cogeneration. Yet, unlike cogeneration of the past, where both power and steam were produced, and where the steam couldn't travel very far, our cogeneration is about creating power and chemicals and other products that can travel around the world. So you might call us cogeneration without co-location. I have a sense that we'll end up massively disrupting the industrial landscape as we know it, much in the same way that Amazon outpaced IBM and forced Sears and others into bankruptcy. Now that leads us to our third rule: keep the waste in the system. So for instance, put the CO2 back where it came from, or use it for building materials, or use it to make chemicals such as methanol. And for the nitrogen we get, instead of returning it to the atmosphere, make the cheapest ammonia on the planet. Then there's our fourth rule: link all the systems and create an ecosystem. To do this, I go back to my roots at J. Aron, the currency and commodity division of Goldman. We need to build our ecosystem on the foundation of deep and liquid markets. This means electricity, ammonia, hydrogen, limestone, caustic soda. Finally, this takes us to our fifth rule. We need the spark to ignite the capital markets so that as many people as possible go build on their own. Net Power is one of the sparks, but Net Power is a software company. We don't build plants ourselves. Instead, we enable others to build. Large asset managers call us an AUM machine. AUM means assets under management. So PE funds, sovereign wealth funds, and many other money managers tell us Net Power enables them to do what they do best: raise money to invest in projects with IRRs in the 20s and higher. There you have it. 5 principles: equipment, multiple earning streams, manage the waste, stick with liquid markets, either be the spark or find the spark. Now, at the very beginning, I expressed my appreciation to a number of people. Now I want to thank each and every one of you for joining today. You clearly care, and for that, I'm truly appreciative. And I want to leave you with 2 words. Join me. Implement these 5 principles with us. These key actions over the next decade will enable us all to reach net zero by 2050. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Bill, for your concise and excellent overview of where Net Power is coming from and how you see the future. Before turning this over to Vicki, 2 questions have already come up, and let me just briefly ask you, and I think we can get brief answers. One from a journalist from Forbes, Jeff McMahon from Forbes. He would like maybe a little more specific on how successful your prototype has been, and when you might see licensing of some new facilities that I think you actually referred to. And a second question that I'll ask right now is, what about oil? The carbon capture we talk about in terms of gas, maybe coal, and power plants and so on. But can this have any effect on oil as you see it?
So as far as the first question, Mr. Ambassador, we have enough out there that has allowed us to go out. We have RFQs out to multiple vendors for 8 different trains right now. And so those are out there. The world knows enough we've got multiple vendors wanting to build all the equipment that we have. And so we're moving forward with those, and those plans will be announced in due course. We're also, as far as the plant down or the test facility down in Houston, we're converting it right now to the point where it can now test synthetic gas, syngas, that we can get from biomass. So the goal here is to focus on now taking us into the world of doing biomass production. And that's a whole new world that will now enable us to get to carbon dioxide removal at prices that will blow everyone away. It will allow us to hit a $32 a ton cost of removing CO2 from the atmosphere with using biomass. So that's underway. It's a big DOE program that the DOE's funded, and we're going forward with that. As far as your question about what's going to happen to oil, let's take one of the major oil exporters in the Arabian Peninsula. I won't name the country, but this could apply to several. Right now, their current economy is that the country has enormous wealth in its oil assets, and they're monetized through exports. And unlike one of the neighboring countries, most of the country's natural gas is sour and not usable without treatment. This country needs sweetened gas. Now, some of this comes from neighbors, but some of it's sweetened through other processes. Unfortunately, most of its sour reserves are so distributed they cannot sweeten most of the stuff economically. Massive amounts of sweet gas, though, is put downhole for pressure maintenance. The challenge that this country has is that carbon-based fuels will ultimately lose their value on the world stage. Their economy needs to grow through replacement of exports and through manufacturing and services. So our solution is we look at the entire country as a whole. They grow an electric economy by using net power to produce power from their sweetened gas. We work with one of our shareholders where we can process all the sour gas, even from the dispersed gas fields, at a fraction of the cost that they're currently doing. And also we couple net power with hydrogen technology to make the hydrogen and ammonia I talked about earlier, and maybe even methanol. We export the ammonia and methanol and put the resulting CO2 downhole and keep it there. The consequence is, instead of being a major carbon exporter, this country puts the carbon back where it comes from, and it becomes a linchpin of a net zero hydrogen economy. I think they have it in them to actually enable the net zero future.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to now introduce our good friend and CEO from Occidental Petroleum, Vicki Holloman. We look forward to your question, your intervention, and your question for Bill. And again, thanks for all of your support of the Atlantic Council, Vicki. You've been a good friend. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be a part of today's conversation. And I want to thank Net Power and the Atlantic Council for inviting me. Thank you, Bill. Congratulations to Net Power on your 10-year anniversary, and cheers to another decade of innovation and decarbonization. And thank you, Your Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales. It's an honor to hear your thoughtful observations on the energy transition and the private sector and how we all can support those efforts. It's an exciting time to be a part of a global movement to find innovative ways to create and sustain a lower carbon world. And we believe we have a moral imperative to take decisive action now. Occidental's committed to bring the energy leader, to be an industry leader in advancing a vision for a lower carbon world. And I know companies around the world are making net zero pledges. Our pledge focuses on achieving net zero emissions associated with our operations before 2040, and an ambition to achieve net zero emissions associated with our products' use by 2050. We're the only U.S. oil and gas company to have made this pledge. Our roadmap is focused on reducing our total carbon impact by decreasing operational emissions, increasing energy efficiency, and capturing and retiring more carbon than our products create, and providing solutions to others looking to do the same. Occidental has been implementing carbon capture, use, and storage as a part of everyday operations for more than 40 years. and we're one of the world's leading authorities on capturing, separating, and safely injecting CO2 back into secure geologic formations for permanent storage. While everything from renewables to planting trees is needed to reduce our global emissions, we cannot achieve the Paris climate goals without CCUS. We're committed to using our expertise to help accelerate CCUS projects around the world and offer powerful, practical CCUS-based initiatives that other industries can also use to decarbonize, including carbon neutral oil and fuels, CO2 sequestration, and carbon management advisory services. And I just want to say before my question, Bill, Bill and I met in Jackson Hole, Wyoming a few years ago. And when we met, he asked for me just to sit down and have a conversation with him. I did, and his brilliance and passion around net power is what made us so interested in net power. And one of the questions was, how do you use net power with respect to oil and gas? Our intent is to use net power in our oil and gas operations because it provides a lower electricity cost in our CO2 projects. Two of the highest costs in CO2 processing to enhance oil and gas production is electricity and the cost of CO2. Net power addresses both of those. So we believe that it's going to be a big factor in helping us to get CO2 at lower cost and lowering our electricity, our operating cost in our oil and gas operations. So we're very committed to it. It's an exciting technology. But Bill, given the fact that we've said we'll reach net zero by 2050, and based on that, that's why we identify and invest in transformational technologies like what you've developed here with net power. My question is, what are the key things that large energy companies can do in addition to that to move the world to net zero?
Well, thank you, Vicki. And yet going back to that day at Jackson Hole, that was just really impressive. I've always been impressed by your leadership, and what Oxy has done is nothing short of exemplary. I mean, not only have you supported net power, but you've invested in a number of other zero carbon technologies. And I like that sort of diversification approach because you are doing more to help more people than anyone else I know. I mean, your vision is just nothing short of exemplary. And as far as large energy companies, what we can do is Net Power would like to work with each and every one of them. Don't just think of Net Power as a destination. Think of Net Power as part of the solution. So let me give you an example of one company that came to us. We had one company that was generating a huge amount of power behind the fence using emitting fossil fuels. They were doing something what you're trying to fix. And they came to us and they thought the answers was net power, and we were happy that they thought that. But what we did was when we looked under the hood of that company, we realized that they needed a massive amount of steam. So we scaled up a full behind the fence solution that involves both power and steam and other valuable products. And this was one of these things where the Net Power team could really work with that company to understand what they're doing overall in their overall operations. And they learned that by using us, we can solve a big problem. So that is a project that really is underway right now. We will be announcing that in short order. We've already filed the interconnects for that. But we helped them go beyond what they thought the solution was to something much bigger. And similarly with one of our shareholders, we're working with a large company to enter the hydrogen economy. They're building hydrogen and ammonia plants that will get their electricity from Net Power. And as I mentioned before, the resulting economics will make these clean fuels really competitive with natural gas. So what can large energy companies do? They can do two things. Number one, follow Oxy's lead in getting in front of so many opportunities. Because I think, with due respect, I think they need to take a page from your playbook, and they need to come talk to you. So And the second thing they can do is work with Net Power to pivot into power generation and into the hydrogen economy at prices that no one else can touch.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bill. And thank you, Vicki, for your intervention and for your question. I would like now to turn to a message from Trude Sundset, who is sending a message from Norway, where she is the CEO of Gassnova, which is the state enterprise in Norway responsible for carbon capture and for storage technologies. And so we will now hear her comments and her question for Bill.
Thank you very much for inviting me to join this distinguished group of thought leaders, and Happy New Year, everyone. Like everyone working to achieve the low carbon transition, I'm grateful to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales for his commitment and leadership. And I believe Bill Brown gave an excellent overview, and I'm very pleased to hear about the great progress Net Power is making in producing lower cost power with zero emissions. In December, the Norwegian Parliament approved funding for the CCS project called Longship, named after the Vikings' innovative ocean-going vessels. Longships allowed the Vikings to travel far and to spread knowledge and technology, as we also want to do. But that is where the analogy stops. Contrary to our ancestors, we come in peace, and we want to contribute to the solution of one of the world's biggest problems, climate change. Longship is the Norwegian government's full-scale carbon capture and storage project, comprising the whole value chain from capturing CO2 from industry sources through transportation and finally safe storage. It is the largest climate project in the history of the Norwegian industry. And we are obviously very pleased with this decision, because the extensive work that has been carried out by our industry partners, Heidelberg Cement, Fortum, Shell, Equinor, and Total, this will help make full-scale CCS a reality, and Gassnova will support them in their efforts. The funding decision clearly demonstrates the Norwegian government's support for the development of carbon capture and storage infrastructure, which is essential if Europe is to achieve its Paris climate goals. So I suppose my question for Bill is, what do you see America doing to play its part? By which I mean, we all know that we can't get to net zero by 2050 without CCS. So what are your expectations from the Biden administration for the technology, both domestically and abroad? Will there be a continuation of Obama-era policies, or will there be more direct investment in technologies such as that which Net Power and the Longship project are developing? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Trude, for all you and Gassnova are doing to help the planet get to net zero by 2050. I mean, the Longship program is a great example of what countries can do. I especially like the approach to the full life cycle of carbon, and its very core, Longship's going to let the world see the benefits of actually managing carbon rather than trying to just turn away from it. And what I think people will soon realize is that the Longship program will be important, truly important, in ushering in a hydrogen economy at really low costs. I mean, costs of hydrogen that every human on the planet can afford, not just the rich people. And so for that, Trude, your leadership's critically important. And to answer the question, let's start with atmospherics. We had a very contentious election in the United States, and worse, we had a very problematic situation this week in Washington. Yet before all that drama, at the end of last year, we saw a bipartisan Congress come together to pass a major COVID bill that was supported by both sides of the aisle. I mean, this really gives me confidence that this new administration will work behind the scenes to bring us together. And now the challenge is really to make sure that we do one thing that was that I heard several years ago at the Aspen Institute. We all have to stop being against those things we are not 100% for. Let me say that again, because I think it's really astute. We've got to stop being against those things we're not 100% for. So instead of choosing a technology, we need to be choosing a future. So I think the government, this new government, is going to be really good at taking us in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you to Truda for your message. I think we can now get to some of the Q&A. Remember, you can put your questions in the Q&A icon. We already have several questions, and frankly, I'm not sure we're going to get to all of them. So I apologize to anybody if we don't get to them. One question that seems to permeate the group of questions is cost, and how your technology and carbon capture will compete with renewables, with new methods of battery storage, cost of renewables coming down. Do you see that as competition for what you're doing, or do you see more of an all of the above approach to reaching net zero?
Listen, I see all of the above approach, and where we're working with everybody, because I think, first of all, Net Power is highly complementary to renewables. We can provide that 24/7 fully dispatchable response for the intermittency of renewables. In addition, as we start getting into, think about it, as you start getting into hydrogen and ammonia at really, really inexpensive prices, those molecules become really good storage mechanisms. I'll never forget, I had an epiphany about 5 years ago that someone held up two glasses, and they said, this glass of gasoline contains over 30 times as much energy as this lithium-ion battery. And it was an amazing transformation. I realized that molecules actually are the ultimate storage mechanism. And so, yes, we will have batteries where we store electrons, but we should also focus on storing energy in molecules that can be transportable and used much more efficiently. So I don't know what will work. I'm agnostic. We're trying to do what we can in the physical economy, and we welcome everyone.
Good, thanks, Bill. We've also gotten several questions relating to coal, and one question being whether you see carbon capture having a role with respect to coal. Another question, a comment being made by the questioner that oil companies seem to be looking towards net zero, looking to the kinds of things that you're talking about, but the coal industry has been resistant. How do you see things going with respect to coal? Is there any hope of getting them into this process?
Well, I think we've always got to focus on the market and what people on the market want. And I think right now in this country, coal is a problem. However, we are working on some technology that we can, and yet you have to take people where they are. So this country will not be a big buyer of coal, but I think that China is going to be doing coal, and India will be doing coal as far as the eye can see. And so we can either vilify them, or we can take that coal and make it work. And so what we're doing with our biomass approach with that will add on to the back of our Allen-Vetvet cycle, we will gasify that biomass. And as I said, by gasifying that biomass, we'll in effect make direct air capture through the biomass route at $32 a ton for CO2 if you sell the power at $25 a megawatt hour, or if people are willing to pay $45 worth of, for megawatt hour of power, then we'll capture all that CO2 for free. But in the process of doing that biomass piece, of gasifying the biomass, we also would have something that China can use to really clean up their economy. Our basic goal is that we need to take people where they sit, and we need to make the economics work. And I truly believe that we can make the economics work for China. Now, I think it'll be a long time before this country uses coal, but I think once they see what can be done and how truly can be made clean, that will change. But we have to be patient. We have to be patient with people. We have to listen and be embracing.
So I take it what you're saying is that you can produce clean coal, but there has to be a market that is receptive to that.
That's correct.
Okay.
I think biomass will get us there first, and once they see what we can do with biomass, biomass will be socially acceptable, and once they see what we can do with biomass, it'll say, all right, take it to coal.
Okay. We have still some more questions before I look back at the Q&A icon. One question is, where does LNG fit in? How can what you're doing be part of the LNG solution?
We're working with a number of major LNG projects right now on integrating net power into LNG to make LNG clean. LNG production has a very large carbon footprint. It so happens that the way net power operates is we're very dependent upon separating oxygen and nitrogen from the atmosphere, and this requires us to cool down the air, to chill it cryogenically. That's the way LNG is done. And so we very much understand the entire process that makes LNG, and there are a lot of synergies between that process and what we do. At the same time, we also believe that JERA in Japan, which is the generation joint venture between TEPCO and Chubu Electric in Japan, announced about 2 months ago that it's going to start replacing its coal with ammonia. And we're very focused on ammonia generation. And so I do think that in the United States that the LNG facilities will also look at setting themselves up to export ammonia, to convert that natural gas into ammonia. And it could very well be that we can compete with LNG, make ammonia at a cost that will compete with LNG. In addition, I believe that ammonia will become a bunker fuel for shipping, and the amount of LNG required, or ammonia required, to make clean shipping for ammonia is the equivalent of 1,000 net power plants. So I do think you'll see LNG facilities simultaneously operate ammonia facilities. In addition, that will accelerate the export of ammonia, because right now the FERC, you won't have to go through FERC regulation approval the way you have to do for LNG.
Good. Okay. Great answer. And I going through the list. So many good questions. One of the questioners is concerned about nitrogen and nitrogen getting into the air. How does your process, or can your process, deal with nitrogen?
So first of all, net power, because it does separate the oxygen into the air into oxygen and nitrogen, it doesn't affect it doesn't put an oxygen on the nitrogen. It just is, benign nitrogen. Because we don't have any nitrogen being burned in our system, we don't create NOx. And so technically you could actually not only put net power in a non-attainment zone where other gas-powered power plants could not exist, because we produce zero NOx. You could Also, because we have no smokestack, you could actually put it in a New York City subway tunnel. Now, as far as you go into the ammonia economy, we do have to start worrying about NOx, because now ammonia was actually used in Belgium for streetcars back in the 1930s. And so ammonia has been a very interesting fuel, and there are a number of people designing for ammonia. And we'll have to do the similar things to ammonia combustion that we did for natural gas combustion, by pre-mixing it and dealing with a combustor technology in order to minimize and eliminate the NOx that comes out of ammonia combustion.
Okay, and I'll go to another question. And I think this is an interesting question. You may be able to give some advice. We have contractors on the call today or on the program, and one of the questions from, I assume, from a contractor is, how do they get involved with you? How do they begin a process of possibly partnering with you?
Just write me, and bill.brown@netpower.com. And it's BIL and BROWN. It's like when I used to live in New York City, and back in the old days, I had to call up restaurants to make a reservation for dinner. And they asked me for my name, Bill Brown. They say, how do you spell that? I would say, which one, Bill or Brown? So, it's pretty simple, Bill.Brown, and no E or no nothing. It's simple. So at netpower.com.
Okay, that's pretty concise and direct. Another question that's come up, and I wonder how much thought you've given to this, is the threat of cyber attack, and how vulnerable your proposed plants might be, what you're doing to take into account the cyber threat.
Well, I think that's a really good question. As people around Net Power will tell you, I have pushed even Net Power to be extremely diligent on taking even our emails to very high cybersecurity levels. And I do believe that you have to be very vigilant here. And in addition, we do have our shareholders, Oxy, Exelon, and McDermott, and they've been fantastic in providing us with advice. And Exelon, because of their experience in nuclear operations, they've been very helpful for us in making sure that we have the cyber security that we need. But I will tell you, you can never do enough. Physical separation is absolutely important. And I think that too many times people connect systems directly to the web and don't realize that they don't need to be connected in real time, and that we need to have sort of a queued data exchange and isolate the systems physically for the operational piece.
Thanks, Bill. We're getting such good questions, and again, I hope I can get to all of them. We only have 5 minutes left, but your answers are so concise. We're getting to a lot of them. One of the a question, and I'm glad it came up. I was thinking the same thing. You talked a little bit about the maritime industry. What about the airline industry? What do you see as the future there with respect to the kinds of technologies you're talking about?
So there are two approaches to airlines. I mean, obviously, the one approach, or actually, we'll just break it into three categories. First of all, you can just do what I'll call the offset approach. Let airlines do what they do and do carbon dioxide removal. You could use some of the technologies that Oxy is doing for carbon dioxide removal. You could use some of the technologies that Eight Rivers is doing for carbon dioxide removal. But you just put it in the air one place and take it away another place. The second approach is going the hydrogen route. If you just use hydrogen as a fuel, you'd have to really redesign a whole airplane. The wings would the amount of fuel that you would need for that would require a massive redesign of aircraft. You might be able to go the hydrogen fuel cell route, or you might be able to go the ammonia route. But I think that we're working with people going down each one of those paths. Another
question that I think is an important one. You're doing a huge amount, obviously, as a private sector company. In developing new technologies, whether it's in your area or in other new areas, what's the role, do you think, of the government? What's the role of DARPA, for example? What's the role of national laboratories? How much cooperation should there be between the private sector and government entities such as that?
It really is a tough question, I would say, and the reason it's tough is I think that each part of the government has different reaction functions, and as much as I said today that we need to break down the silos in effect, I think that the power sector and the chemical sector and the oil and gas sector, for instance, we're going to basically smush those together. I think we need to address that in the government, because I've been absolutely astonished by how we have to, in terms of budget and appropriations, we're put into all these silos, which really I think are cause a certain level of dysfunctionality. We've been very fortunate to work with various government labs, and both here and abroad. In fact, the first money that we ever got was out of the UK government, and the UK government gave us support back in 2011. And I do think that the UK system has something that the US system can learn from, and that is they actually had the ability to make decisions on the fly and invest in us because a person inside the government thought it would be a good idea, rather than putting it through all these very difficult procurement instructions. There's more of a discretionary approach in the UK for part of it, and we benefited from that sort of discretion.
Good. And I think we're really coming to the point where I have to ask the last question, and then we'll make a few closing remarks. I wish we had more time, because there are some really good questions that we won't be getting to. They keep coming in. But I think this is an important question. What are some of the key lessons that you've learned from your test facility? And with respect to the future, there was a very complicated question, which I'm not technical enough to really fully understand the question, but maybe the bottom line was, what's the scale of the plants that you're talking about in the future? What are we talking about as far as size, cost, or any other consideration you might want to mention?
So first of all, because we are in effect a cogen plant, we produce multiple streams. Our allocated capital cost per kW is around $1,200 for the power piece of it. Now, the other piece of it, other costs are allocated to the CO2 and the argon and those other things. That is higher than a combined cycle today. I do believe the combined cycles are roughly $1,000, but combined cycles have had years of learning curves. And as we hit our learning curve, we expect to hit way below combined cycles in just a few iterations. The size of the plants right now, if you like Henry Ford, that's any size you want as long as it's 284 megawatts. It's where he said you can have any colors you want as long as it's black. But we have a huge amount of demand that's come for smaller turbines, and we're very heartened by that. And so we're getting a bunch of people coming in for the what I'll call sort of 25 megawatt net electric turbines. And that has so many applications, and so many people want to do distributed generation. We can do that. I don't know. You threw a lot of questions in there. Is there another piece of it that you want me to hit real fast?
No, I think that covers it, because we are running out of time. But let me say, I think this has been absolutely fantastic. You've been fantastic. We have gotten so much information out in just 1 hour. I know we could go for another hour or 2 hours, but I think it's been unbelievable how much we've all learned just in in this short space. So I'm going to have to close things off now, and I want to obviously thank everybody from joining today's discussion. Want to especially thank His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Bill, obviously, Vicky Holub, True to Sunset, for all of your remarks, and we're looking forward to hosting you and everybody else in the audience at future Atlantic Council events. I hope that you will join us, and you can go to our website for our flagship event, our Global Energy Forum, which will be taking place virtually from January 19th to 22nd. And this is our annual forum, which convenes the world's top energy and foreign policy experts and decision makers to set the global energy agenda for the year ahead, and to examine long-term geopolitical, geoeconomic implications of the energy transition that we're going through. So please register on the Atlantic Council website. I want to thank everyone who helped put this event together. Mercedes Sapupo, Jackson Styron, Jasper Gilardi, and our Associate Director, Olga Kakova, who is just amazing at getting these events done. And we're certainly grateful to our colleagues at Net Power and the Sustainable Markets Initiative for their partnership in this event. So if anybody hasn't seen the whole event and wants to see it, it's available on our website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And please go ahead and share it with your colleagues. So regretfully, I'm going to have to bring this event to a close. But again, thanks so much, Bill, and everybody else, for just a fantastic hour. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.